In this video, I'll give you a quick walkthrough of how the different plots and tables in the final case in the bootcamp were created. So the first thing we'll need is to get the data. So if you're in the bootcamp and you're on case number 5, then you should see in the section Introduction to Radiant a link that says data available here. So let's right-click on that and go ahead and save the data. Now the data is in a .rda format, which is a binary format used by R. Okay, so just click Save wherever you want. It could be going to your Downloads folder or wherever. So make sure that you know where that is and then go and get the data in a minute. So you'll be installing Radiant in a bit, but first we'll just use the server version of Radiant. Okay, so if you have your user ID, just open this up in a new tab and you should see the following. All right, so this is actually what Radiant would look like when you start it on your laptop, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So there's some data loaded here that we don't actually need it, it's just as an example. So let's go and find the data we just downloaded for case number 5. It was sales 2015. Well, let's open that up. And what you'll notice is we first get a little preview of the data. So these are just 10 rows of the data, just so we can get a little sneak peek. And there's also some information that's been added to this data set so that we know what the variables in it are. So there's date variable, sales, and so on. All right. So we're now going to just jump back and forth between the case and the data and see if we can recreate the different tables and plots. So let's jump to the top. First thing we saw was this interactive table of sales information, cups sold, average spent, and so on. Across different dates. So how would we generate that in Radiant? We go to the View tab. Once we have the data open, there's our interactive table. Okay. So all the different variables are selected. We could actually just select one or select all of them. We can sort the data by date, by cups, by average spend within cups, and so on. So all kinds of sorting that we can do. All right, so we'll talk more about what you can do with these tables and how you can filter them and sort them. For example, if I just want to see the days that are sunny, I just select those. If I just want to see the days that are cloudy, I can filter like this. Okay, so very, very straightforward, but we'll talk more about this later on. Okay. So it's a very important skill to learn how to play with your data, how to arrange it, rearrange it, summarize it, and so on. All right, so that was the interactive table. And again, I'm just going quickly through this, see if you can reproduce it, and then we'll talk more about this during the in-class session for the bootcamp, and then of course during the quant class when you start the full-on MBA program. So let's create a first plot, which is a histogram. And a histogram is just a plot that gives us counts, number of cases of a particular value or a range of values. And because we are doing a histogram of the sunny variable, which just says, was the day cloudy or was it sunny? That's a categorical variable. So not numerical, but different categories. And we want the count of the number of days that were cloudy and the count of the number of days that were sunny. So we're going to create a histogram. How do we do that? We do that in the Visualize tab. And so the data is going to be shown here, and here are the different types. It's already selected. It's the default type of plot, a histogram. So all we need to choose now is the sunny variable. And there's our plot. Now the scaling is slightly different, so I can actually change the size of the plot. I can make it taller or wider as I want, but this is the same plot as what you saw in the bootcamp. Right? And so it shows us there are significantly more sunny days than there are cloudy days. But as we said in the case, we actually would also like to see a little table, an actual count, the actual number of sunny days versus cloudy days. So what's a quick way to do that? Well, one is to use the Pivot tab. And so the Pivot tab, it's sort of like pivot tables in Excel. We can just choose a categorical variable, in this case sunny, and it will count for us that there were 123 cloudy observations, or rows with cloudy as a value, and 242 with sunny. Actually, in this particular tab, we could also just click Show Plot, and it would create that same histogram that you saw earlier. All right, so that was pretty easy. Next one was a scatter plot of the date versus sales. Right? And in this scatter plot, we could see a little bit of a pattern. Hopefully you can see it as well, that in January and here towards the end in December of the year, sales seem to be a bit lower and perhaps a bit higher in this area. But there's certainly quite a bit of variability, which makes it a little hard to see exactly what the pattern is. So remember that each point is a date and the sales on that date. Right? So we can go down and see what date it was, and we can go to the left here and see what the sales level was. All right, so how do we generate the plot like this? Oh, let's go back to the Visualize tab. We'll choose, we're going to be choosing date. Where's date? Let's see. So we're going to be choosing a scatter plot, and then there's date against sales. And there's our plot. So again, this scaling is a little different than what you saw in the bootcamp. So why don't I just actually change this a bit? Let's change it to, let's say, 900. So this is a lot more like what you saw in the case. Right? Now, what we'll do more in the class, in the program, is see if we can fit lines to these types of plots. Now, a regular line isn't actually going to be all that informative because maybe the relationship between time or date and sales is actually nonlinear. So we can actually start to visualize something like that by clicking the loose checkbox here. Again, we'll explain more what that is in class. But here you see that it looks to be a nonlinear relationship between the date or the time and sales. And we'll get back to what that means and how we can try to model that. All right. So because this was so noisy, we thought, well, maybe what we can do is we can carry a bar chart. A bar chart of the month, which is a categorical variable, versus the average sales level. So let's see if we can do that. So we're going to choose month, and then we'll do bar plot. All right. So the issue with bar plots, and although they're very commonly used, there's actually a pretty significant limitation to them, which is if you just look at this bar plot and somebody say, well, what's the highest value? You'd say, well, it's August. Right? And it is indeed the highest average. But does that mean that sales are always highest in August? Are sales ever higher in July than they are in August? And so one way to look at that is to produce this other plot, which you already saw flash by actually. It's a scatter plot of month versus sales. So all we have to do here is just change the plot type from month to, from bar to scatter, and we get the plot that you saw in the case. Right? And so here we do indeed see that sales on average, or in expectation, are a little higher in August than they are in July. But there are certainly dates where sales were higher in July than they were in August. There's actually quite a lot of variability around that average. Right? And that's interesting to know as well. It's certainly not the case that every day in August has higher sales than every day in July. All right, and so that's important to know. All right, so the final plot that we were looking at was another scatter plot, but now of temperature versus sales. So let's see if we can make that as well. We're already on scatter, so we don't need to change the plot type. We just need to select temperature. All right, so here's our scatter plot. And so what we can do, again, is try to plot a line into that. And so this shows us that there does seem to be a positive relationship between temperature and sales. So as temperature increases, sales increase as well. But what we'd really like to know also is what is the slope of that line? And you may have looked at this type of issue before. We'll actually be using regression to try to figure out what the slope of this line is and what that means and how we can kind of predict what sales will be for different temperature levels. But what we'd also really like to know is temperature is probably related to the month as well. And so can we separate out the effect of the month and temperature? And so we'll look at that again by using regression in class. All right, so that's how you create the different plots. The next step is going to be to install a Radiant. All right, so there's detailed instructions on the bootcamp page as well, but there's another link that gives you even more information. Basically, the first step is going to be to download and install R. Right, so R is the programming language. We're going to be building on top of that. So Radiant is an app, a tool built on top of R. And so you can just go ahead and download R from either of these links, depending on whether you're on a Mac or on Windows. If you're on Windows, this is really important. Make sure that you install R into the directory CRR3.3.1, okay, and not into the program files directory. So there's a video down here. Please walk through that so that we're sure that you've got it installed correctly. Once you have R installed, you can start it up and then copy and paste this command into R and press return. Okay. So there's a separate video for Windows and Mac. The install is slightly different, but not tremendously so. And so I expect you won't have too many difficulties. If you do run into any trouble, please make sure to post on the Piazza site. Okay, so the link to the Piazza site is here. Once you click on that, you should be asked to sign up. So please do so. And once you have Radiant installed and you follow the instructions, then you should see on your screen the following. Right? So this is what we saw when you started up the Radiant application on the server. You should now also be able to do this directly from your laptop. Okay? Again, if you have any questions, please post them on the Piazza site, and I look forward to seeing you in class.